I'm Ryan Hitzel, founder of Roark. Welcome to Tangled Yarns, an audio exploration of the stuff that's in my head, with people that push the limits on storytelling, adventure, and everything in between. Welcome to episode 2 of Tangled Yarns. We have my friend, Pain Cave provocateur and prolific photographer Chris Burkard with us today. What's happening?
Stoked to be here. Yeah, this is a long time coming. I mean, I feel like this podcast is probably just a reflection of most of our conversations on trips or when we catch up, so it'll be rad to you know, push record and have this one for the long haul.
Totally. Freestyle a little
Yeah.
bit, maybe a few
Yeah.
targeted questions to spot some
Where
conversation.
where are you, by the way? That's a cool zone. Are you in your office or
I'm in my office. Yeah.
yeah,
Got a
sick.
couple, yeah, just trip shots and art from friends. I
Rad. I love it.
think
That's the stuff that gets me fired up.
photos always look good on a black wall.
Yeah, for sure.
Where are you?
I am in Pacific City, Oregon. We're on a shoot right now, doing this nighttime kind of lit up, illuminated project for a friend of mine. And yeah, it's been wild. The hours have been rough. It's been like 7, 8 p.m. till 3:30 in the morning, and then you get back and you're hungry and you're like trying to sleep until 10, and then in the morning, and then processing photos. And so yeah, it's been a little wild. It's what I love. It's definitely in my wheelhouse, but as I was saying before, I'm not like 19 anymore. So going through the night without sleep is it's painful on the body. You feel it big time.
You love it.
I do. I do, but I'm kind of kicking myself because I'm like, I have such a hard time saying no. And especially when projects are exciting or good, and you know how that goes. It's like you don't want to miss out, and then you overcommit, and then you're like, whoa, am I delivering my best work? Or how much of myself can show up to these projects? And I think that just comes with the territory, getting older and kind of being realistic about your work and what you really aspire to bring to a project or a shoot. So yeah, it's all learning, man. I love it. This is what I'm here for.
Every day is a new day, dude, a new day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
so you don't really need an introduction, but I'm just gonna do it to kind of fire myself up, fire you up a little bit,
Okay, yeah, for
because you have
sure.
so many accolades. But Chris is photographer, he's director. I see you as a storyteller. He's published multiple books, including The Boy Who Spoke to the Earth and At Glacier's End, amongst many more. He's directed films like Under an Arctic Sky and The Forgotten Coast. Been published in numerous magazines, from National Geographic, The New Yorker, Surfer Magazine, Surfer Journal. List goes on and on and on. Um, he's at a TED Talk. I mean, I think most photographers struggle to get like 1,000 likes on Instagram, and you've done a TED Talk, and it was truly
Yeah.
prolific. And
Thanks, man.
I love, yeah, going back to that and referencing all the old photos and sort of what drives
Yeah.
you. But that was a few years ago, yeah.
It was. And it's interesting is like the basis of that TED Talk was so much about some of those early projects or trips that we did and or were probably at the impetus of my career. I kind of look back on that and with a little fondness, but also with some sadness because I'm like, oh man, that chapter of life, when you're in it, it's all you can think about is like what's next, or the growth that you want the brand to see, or the growth that you want your career to see, and then you get out of it and you're looking back and you're like, whoa, those were like special moments. And I've been trying to like sit more in that these days, appreciate them when they're coming. And because I look back and I'm like, wow, those photos were crazy. I wonder if in that moment I actually appreciated it. I'm like, oh, this is special, and you often don't. That's just like the curse of being a creative, right? You don't really have the time to process a lot of those things that you're going through in the moment. So you look at it on a computer later and you're like, that was sick.
What's rad about it too is it locks, that period in time, and it's almost kind of
Mhm,
like it's like your founding articles or like your founding
mhm,
principles of who you were when you were developing, and can always like reference back to that moment, just kind of gut check where you're at today, where you want to go, how you want to evolve. So really
mhm,
cool to have that, and we'll get into that question. That's something I'm really interested in talking to you about, is just sort of
for
how we
sure.
evolve today. Last little bit, as you said, we've collaborated on a few trips to Cuba, Iceland, Alaska. We made a film together called Arc of Volusia that I'm really, really proud of, and sort
Yeah.
of one of the defining moments, I think, of our brand. And you were also a big part of a book we published called Roaming. I grabbed it right here. Also, probably
Nice.
told you this many times. Really kind of a, both the defining trip for the brand,
Mhm.
but kind of a defining photo. And it was one that kind of just lurked around, and it was used on social media. I think you
Yeah.
used it a few times, but when the book came up, like right when we got the deal with Rizzoli, I was like, "That's the cover. I'm not even gonna look at
Yeah.
the photo."
You know what's funny about that image right there, especially that one, is I remember doing that trip. It was like February in Iceland or some like brutal wintertime trip. And like clockwork, we're just around the whole country, roaming around, looking for moments. And I remember shooting that and like thinking nothing of it really. And then years later, maybe like legitimately 2 years later, there was somebody working in my office who was like just an intern, talented kid who was just kind of helping like look for photos and we were like curating an art show and he pulled up this image and he's like, "Oh, this one's crazy." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that's really cool." Like, and I don't think I had really like played with it or processed it because it had this like monochromatic feel. And I'm like, let's like lean into that black and white feeling. And
Mm.
dude, and honestly, it's one of my all-time favorite images. It's one of my more, I would say, like iconic photos too. Like when people think of my work, they resonate with that picture. But it's funny how it didn't even register. Not only like when I shot it, but years later. I don't even know if when we like when we selected images for the catalog for Roark
Yeah.
and for kind of that project as a whole, I don't even know if it was a standout really. And now I'm like, well, that's like one of the sickest. And so I just think it's funny to look back and realize how I guess out of touch maybe sometimes we are with like what we're creating or what we're shooting, or what stands the test of time. Because obviously when we're doing these projects, like we're shooting video, we're shooting stills, we're shooting a lot of like going through a lot of looks, a lot of like, clothing and this and that. And sometimes things get lost in the shuffle. So I love that you pointed that out because I look at that cover and I'm like, oh, that's a sick one.
It's funny for me, as a founder of a brand, it encapsulates like everything that I wanted to achieve, like the struggle, um, to get a wave, to be with friends in hospitable, inhospitable places. And there was one, it's funny, the photo that we used actually has a surf kind of carved into the snow in the back windshield. It says surf, and there's a
Yeah.
dollar sign on the S.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
And that was just another little detail. And I don't know who wrote it. I had just left before you shot this photo. So I don't know who wrote that.
Right.
But it also is just like how hard we're trying to do this thing. And as athletes, like, and as brands, and just like, oh my God, just really encapsulated like all the complications and
Mhm.
challenges and triumphs, all in like one picture. And
Yeah.
it was really good that day as well. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's just
It
awesome.
was funny because what was interesting about that is I remember we were at the beach. This is actually a spot not far from like Reykjavik, the main city of Iceland, right? And
Yeah.
we were at the beach, and I remember it started to snow, and it was like kind of like end of the day, like, "Hey, this is pretty shitty." Like and I think like you and whoever you're with, you're like, "Hey, we're gonna go back and like organize clothes or whatever it was, prep the creative for the next day." And this was just like a novelty session for the guys, Raf Breweiler,
Zoller.
God, who else? Yeah, exactly. Nate Zoller. And it was like, cool, it's gonna snow, like not gonna get any surf photos. And I just shot a couple pictures while they were changing, and then that was it because I couldn't even see them in the lineup. And I think that that's interesting because oftentimes it is like when the work is done and maybe some of the stress is gone that you like create your best work because you're not, normally like, I mean, and for people to understand like my relationship with you, you're the creative director, owner of this brand. I'm there hired to help shoot it. Even though you and me have this working relationship, there's still a little bit of that like, oh yeah, I want to make sure we're getting what we need and we got this list and all these moving parts. And then kind of when that like strips away, you're given permission to like create I think your best stuff, which is interesting.
Totally. Yeah, and it's always a trip for us. I think especially sort of in the beginning, we were really trying to chase adventure more so than actually even shoot the photos of the clothes. Like the clothes were there, it was part of the mission. It's not, until really like I think recently where we look at the photos of the clothes and we go, oh, this is actually what keeps us in business and pays
Yeah.
the lights and everything. And we can chase the dream, sell the dream. That's a super important part of the brand. Probably the most important part of the brand is to kind of chase this dream, right? But and sell it and inspire people to go out there and do it. But at the end of the day, we make clothes and we got to take pictures of them too.
Dude, it's the I mean that at the end of the day, that is the biggest crux is like I have to, I was just talking to what Snacks, Ryan Velasic, who's worked with me a lot, but over the years, so we were just talking about how, on shoots and projects, it's like you remember very clearly that you're there to like shoot a product and sell a product, move a product. Doing that is what keeps this brand new business. And but at the end of the day, you're like, if you don't have like a goal or a mission statement in mind or some North Star, then you get so lost in the process of like, oh, I'm just shooting something to then advertise, right? Like no, it's got to represent something bigger. And I think that that's what's so fun about making like an accompanying film or a zine or doing an art show or a book is like, yeah, we got the assets we needed, but great brands and great creatives, like they lead with the intention of like, hey, we're doing this trip and the goal is to inspire this feeling. And that's kind of how it was when we went to Cuba. It was like so loose. It's like, yeah, we're going to spend the whole day skateboarding through the streets of Havana because like this is the vibe. Like it's not about the clothing, it's about like creating this ambiance. And I really appreciate that, and there's not enough of that these days, a little bit, like so, and as you know, it gets harder and harder.
Just like like humans, I think when you have a greater purpose and maybe just more than making, that t-shirt or that sweatshirt or those jeans, I think people care. I think it's
Yeah,
ultimately, I don't want to get too into making products, not what this is about, but yeah, product clothes make you feel good. It's essential, to living
yeah,
life, right? And but at the end of the day, we want to inspire people. So that's why we're
yeah,
talking. I want to run through some stuff though. I know we only got about an hour and
yeah,
got some thoughts, got some questions. I want to
yeah,
start
hit me.
I want to start with the pain cave. I feel like suffering
uh
and challenge drives you. I know there's many things that drive you, but I think you thrive on these difficult explorations. You love these endurance feats. You've gotten more and more into, I think, endurance athletics over the last, 5 to 10 years. And
yeah.
just like you're describing the photo shoot that you're on right now, a lot of them they sort of encourage pain and suffering and also triumph. So, what's up with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that at the end of the day, the pursuit of action sports photography is a pursuit. You're chasing around most of the time some of the world's most talented athletes.
Mhm.
And you're sometimes trying to keep up, and that's what's so tricky is like I've never been able to give more than like 75% of my attention to one thing because when you're shooting, as you know very well, you're shooting climbing one week and then you're doing a shoot where there's like climbing and ski touring and then there might even be surfing. Like you're having to be able to do all those things, get in the water when the surf is 10 foot and hold a housing, and then all of a sudden you're putting on skis and skins and you're loading up and going into the mountains. And so I think that early days for me, it was a lot of like chasing people around like that and maybe realizing like, oh, well, I would love to see where my physical pursuits kind of begin and end. Because when you're always documenting somebody else's and you're always documenting somebody else's achievements or goals or whatever, I guess it just begs the question like, oh, well, what do I enjoy? What am I passionate about? And obviously my passion comes from seeing new environments, new landscapes, and it's always been about that. It doesn't really matter the modality. But as I think I've been given more permission in my career to explore other things, being the person who is, as you said, like giving the TED talk, like what's the point of giving a TED talk? What's the point of talking at all, which now is a big part of my career, if you don't have a story to tell? If all your stories are just, yeah, this one time I was standing on the beach and this person did this, right? Oh, and I watched this person, grind the longest rail on this Red Bull sheet. Like that's cool, but I want to talk about or share more so because it's a part of my vision, North Star, whatever, that about what I felt out there, what my experience was. And if I can combine storytelling with a physical effort in some way, it doesn't have to be suffering. I know that that word is like, I don't want to like, I don't want to, paint any pictures like I'm some glutton for punishment. I think that a lot of like presence and awareness and intentionality can come from those experiences. In many ways, being on expedition of any kind, whether it's a surf trip or riding your bike or whatever, it's about stripping away all the superfluous aspects of life and figuring out what, you know, these experiences mean to you when there isn't like the accolades and the attention and the blah, blah, and you're just, you're in the middle, you're in the doldrums, the shittiest part, right? The 9 hour drive across the country because you want to get surf on the other side. Like everybody wants to celebrate the beginning and the end, but the middle is really where the growth happens. And so I really find myself like loving that growth. I'm a big like advocate of learning new things. I think it's what's kept me young and feeling inspired, and also like being able to offer something to the brands or companies that I work with, whether it's perspective or whether it's a creative skill set. I feel like that's been like a um, integral part of my journey a bit.
It's all about the journey. I think when you go
Yeah,
back, and you've talked about this, ad
yeah,
nauseam, but like I think in the beginning of, let's go back to the 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s of surf photography, and it was always like,
yeah,
not to say there wasn't a grind getting places and that it wasn't a challenge, but you're talking mostly like warm water, warm weather paradise, right? Like we grinded
yeah,
it out and got to G land after, 20 hours of travel, and sure there's mosquitoes and tigers and all these, but you
yeah.
are in sort of paradise. And
Mhm.
I know you live in Iceland, and Iceland definitely affected my life and kind of opened me up to like, wow, shit, like this is kind of paradise, this Arctic thing. It's just that
Yeah,
you gotta kind of like get through the superfluous. You got to get through just like that cold, which is kind of, once you wrap your mind around it, not that big of a deal. So you
yeah,
brought this whole other aspect, I think, to surf photography in the beginning of your career, where you started to explore cold weather, cold water, in the water, on the beach,
yeah.
not easy, hard to capture, fingers are frozen. Like, at what point in that journey did you kind of look at yourself and like and say, "Hey, this is kind of paradise. This is
You
this
know,
is
it was kind of early on. I mean, I remember vividly, like the first trip really. I mean, there was a lot of great trips, but the one that really like cracked me open in regards to what the potential was. Because I had been to Canada and spent time with the Brewweilers and gone up there, and then I obviously grew up in California and spent a lot of time in Northern California, Oregon, all that. So cold water was a part of who I was. Like wearing a wetsuit was just something I was used to and comfortable with. But when I went to Iceland for the first time with Timmy Turner, I shot this article for Men's Journal. He had a big old scar right down his skull because he had basically had that, staph infection in his
yeah,
brain. And so that trip was mind blowing because it was like, yeah, 20 years ago almost. And things were different. Like we were driving around the country, camping, everywhere, on remote beaches. And I was just like, this place is like a gold mine for surf, first of all. But the access to sort of unfettered nature was like unreal. I mean, just surreal. You're looking around and you're seeing a perfect wave, and behind you is a glacier. And at
yeah,
night, we'd make a driftwood campfire on the beach and then look out of our sleeping bags and see the northern lights. And I was like this is possible. Like this exists on Earth. Like these emotions and feelings and I just kind of told myself, I'm like, hey, like whatever it takes to have this be the places you're going, you need to do that. And dude, I mean, it drained my bank accounts. There were times where I was like getting, green lit to go on trips, but I was having to cover everything. And if I didn't score, then like the magazine wasn't going to pay for it. Like that high of risk.
yeah,
Like I was married at the time, 21 years old. I'm like maxing out a credit card and like not even telling my wife because I was so worried. And all on a gamble that maybe we would get surf, maybe we'd score. So I would say like definitely I paid the price for that. And there were trips that didn't go so well. There were trips that ended me up in, a jail cell in Russia or having to like do some weird stuff with to hide equipment or hide gear or whatever it is. The stories kind of go on, but like
yeah,
there was a lot learned from that because it was the early days. Nowadays, cold water surf photos or surfing in Iceland or they feel a little bit commonplace, which is excellent because it just means more people are experiencing it. But I definitely feel like that was an education for me and it informed what I love about Earth and what I love about surfing. And honestly, all of my decisions in life have been directly affected by that trip. And it's weird when you think about like a certain trip or a certain experience having this trickle effect where it like maybe just 1 degree off your course, but then
yeah,
20 years later, you're like this far from where you would have been.
totally. Yeah, the that one facet of it just kind of like exponentially
Yeah.
affects a whole new world
Yeah.
over here. So like it feels like historically, but also in the early days, you kind of had a certain type of character you were bringing on these trips, like certain person
Yeah.
kind of like convinced to like take this risk and go somewhere super weird and chase perfect waves in cold weather. What was like that dynamic? Who are those people? What are they like? Why are they different?
Oh, dude, that's a great question. I love that you asked that because truly that was like one of the big eye-opening things. Like I realized early on, like being a nobody kid from Central California, meaning that like I didn't have relationships with pro surfers. I didn't grow up with any, there was barely anybody in my area. I would have to travel down to San Clemente or go up to Santa Cruz or whatever it is just to find like really talented people. So oftentimes I learned really quickly. I'm like, well, these trips, first and foremost, I'm not going to get the Andy Irons and the Kelly Slaters on those trips. It's just oftentimes they have too much going on. They don't really want to suffer like that. And so I kind of had to like readjust and realize that, well, the people I love shooting with, the Josh Molkoys, the Peter Mendias, the Malloys, Brew Eilers, Nate Zoller, like the important thing was that these people loved to be there. And when you're with somebody who actually loves to be in a place, and when you bring up the trip, you're like, I realized at a certain point, I'm like, I'm not even going to tell them this is a surf trip. I'm just going to be like, hey, I'm doing a trip to this place. Like, is that interesting to you? Are you interested in going to Iceland, to Norway, to the Faroes, or whatever? And if the answer was yes, then I knew like perfect. Like this is the beginning of like what could be really cool because you want to be with people that are excited. Same for you. Like your excitement on those trips was sometimes eclipsing that of the surfers, and I'm like, that's what I need. I need like a creative team that's actually like invested in this. Like, yeah, like no, we'll drive through the night. No worries. Yeah, we'll siphon gas out of the car. No worries. Yeah, we'll eat hot dogs. And it's just like that, what it requires, the rawness, back then especially was such a huge part of it. So to answer your question, I was always looking for people who were like not cold water aficionados necessarily,
Mm.
but people who like weren't scared of cold water, who were willing to surf everything from like 20 foot to 2 foot, right? Because you'd be on these trips and sometimes you come around the corner and there's a reeling perfect longboard wave. And then, everywhere else is messy and massive. You want somebody who like, like a Dan Malloy who could just style out on an Alaya
Yeah.
or, somebody like a Nate Zoller who can, surf fun small Laguna or like 20-foot Mexico. So I think that like jack of all trades is really important. And then I think the last thing is just like you want somebody who surfs for me with a more classic style. And what I mean by that is like I love shooting with like the guys who are just incredible aerialists who could, do every trick in the book, but those often require a specific type of wave and specific types of conditions, right? And going with somebody like that to a remote place where we have like a super offshore walled up point break, or we have like a, I don't know, just like dumping beach break barrels. You want somebody who's down for that too. So I looked for those traits. And I think that what I found was that there were a lot of people willing, but it was usually like this slightly older crowd.
Mm.
It wasn't like all the young guns who, at the time, at least when I was shooting surfing, and I think a lot, as a career, it was kind of like a lot of that younger generation was super influenced by Dane and what he was doing, which was mind blowing, right? But it's like, oh, we need like side shore, onshore wind, and we want like 4 to 6 foot beach break, and I'm like, well, that's not what we're gonna get. So,
And they're not
there
looking for 7 mil booties either.
no, no, yeah, because like, yeah, I can't feel the board. So there was a criteria, and what's cool is like they were these like classic, iconic characters, people who had seen some stuff, and I kind of veered away. I guess when I worked early days for Surfline, I was doing trips traveling with Groms all over the world, and that was not fun. I felt like I was babysitting, and I had definitely an experience or two where I'm like, you know. Taking the beer bottles, out of their hands and this and that. And I'm like, dude, I'm like just on the cusp of being too old for this shit. Like,
Yeah.
and that's what's so funny because I'm just like, I'm only like, I was only like 6, 7 years older, but I'm like, this is
Yeah.
just, I don't want to be the responsible one. I want to be with people who like I know I can trust if something goes wrong, and then they can trust me. And these trips required a bit more, and when you're with someone like Raph Breweiler, you're like, dude, this guy knows what's up. I trust him with my life. And it shows. I mean, he's literally a Coast Guard. So it's like that's the type of person.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember
Yeah.
remember when Harrison Roach just joined our program as an ambassador, and the first trip was up to the Aleutian Islands, and he's a longboarder, kind of surf everything guy, but
Yeah.
world champion longboarder from Noosa Heads and warm water, tropical, classic Aussie. And he just looked at me, he's all, yes, like I'm all in. And yeah, it was rad to see in that trip how, he brought a longboard and he brought twin fins and he brought a thruster. And you guys, you
Yeah.
literally did that. You surfed everything from 1 2 foot, just like perfectly offshore, small little longboard waves to like a 15-foot slab right hander.
Yeah.
And those
Yeah,
guys.
yeah, yeah.
He was all over it. I think that,
Dude, it honestly, and that trip blew my mind because I had never worked with somebody like that, like who had that high of a skill level surfing those types of boards. And I was always like, oh man, is this gonna be like, oh, he needs a super specific type of like, Australian point break setup? But no, he just performed in every wave that we threw at him. And it was rad because you love seeing diversity. You love seeing guys who like embrace that diversity, which is so cool.
yeah. So high pain threshold for cold water, versatility is a must, an open mind, maybe a bit of a survivalist.
Yeah. And the last trip you guys did with those guys to like remote Norway with my friend Ryan was like incredible. I love seeing that still be such a big part of the brand and also those guys' experience because you know that they had a good time. Like you know that, going to Alaska or going to Norway was profound for them. And I think that as somebody who's seen that same level of profoundness, I like love it when other people catch the fire, a little bit.
Yeah, and I think when you're in a cold space like that, and I remember vividly you and I sitting on the beach in Cuba, and I probably had a Cuba Libre in my hand, and you're sitting there like, what are these clowns doing? And you're like, dude, like, this is killer. This is fun. We almost gone to jail. We almost were in a alleyway brawl with a bunch of Cubans over politics, and we ended up giving them
Yeah.
beers, and they invited us into their house. We had seen all this like spectrum, we chased waves. It was flat. But you're
Yeah.
like, gotta go to Iceland. Like we have to. Like the
Yeah.
next trip, like you're literally like, you're gonna plan everything around Iceland. And I
Yeah.
sat there and I'm like, all right, let's do it. Rocket ship to Reykjavik. Let's go.
Yeah.
And that was super meaningful for me because we had done a bunch of trips and adventures to
Mm.
Japan and Mexico, and you're trying to get off the beaten path with Cuba at that time. Cuba was hard to get into and not everybody
Mhm.
was
Yeah.
going. And Iceland was that first trip for us that really had just like a gnarly rigor, had consequence, was super
Mhm.
cold. And as a traveler, I'd snowboarded a lot around the
Mhm.
world,
Yeah.
but surf-wise, I'd really just kind of like stuck to the tropics. And
Yeah.
that trip was transformational for the brand, I think. The ability to get up there with our crew, with you, and experience all
Mm.
that was transformational for me. Um, I hadn't seen so much magic and spirituality that was just in the air. You're
Yeah.
used to going to places like Mexico or India,
Mhm.
where like, spirituality, it's there, but it's almost like manifested by religion and
Mm.
candles and stuff. And I just felt like
Mm. Yeah.
just it not only emanated from the people in a very quiet way, but it emanated from every rock, every snowflake that fell, the
Mm.
wind, the pixies, it was just like
Yeah.
every fjord, you'd be driving, we'd be in a blizzard. It would be like, I don't know, 10 degrees, 15 degrees. And it's a white out and there's white knuckling in the Land Rovers and you'd come
Yeah.
down, pull into a fjord. And it's like, I'm talking within like 2 minutes, 5 minutes,
Mm.
say. It's like 65 degrees, green,
Yeah.
like Viking treasure buried somewhere amongst the pixies. So
Yeah.
that was yeah, that when people ask me, what my favorite trip was, and I'm sure you get this question, we'll get to it at the end. But for me, it's always Iceland. That was like a
Mm.
really incredible trip, and I get to surf up there and get waves. And you got one of my
Mm.
all-time favorite bro pics of Rod Stewart and I paddling.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
It's so funny is the way you articulated it was probably the best way I've ever heard it articulated, which is that there is like magic in the landscape. It's not something that like people have like brought into the country. It has nothing to do with people. In fact, it's almost like they're just there to bear witness to it. And it's what, forced me to want to keep exploring those remote areas, those, more areas where there's a lot of vertical relief where the mountains meet the ocean. I've always said like if I'm looking for a landscape, that's what I want. I want the drama, the drama of steep cliffs that meet a wild ocean.
Volatile,
And
volatility.
yeah, and
Again.
exactly. And honestly, like in that regard, like it's not hard to take a great picture. You just have to be there. You just have to be willing to go. And I think that it is also an interesting case study in the fact that like you guys went at this period of time when it was still very fresh and very new and very exciting
Mm.
for people, um, and hadn't been done that much. But then it also was like this thing that catapulted the brand into this next space. And it's harder and harder to find those places for sure. But or it's just more and more expensive because you got to go further and deeper. But I do think it's nice to like for me to like sit back and look at like, well, what made this photo so special? What made this trip so special? What made this film so special? Was it the place? Was it the setting? Was it the people? And the reason I say that is because I like to reflect and look back often and try to understand it, because if I can understand it, I can move forward with like, hey, the next thing is this, or the next place is this, or you know what? It's not about the place, it's about this person. And I know we've kind of chatted about that too. Like, what is the thematic thing that brings you through this story? Because I know that narrative and creating a narrative around projects is super important. I loved early days of Roark when it was all about this like mythical character and what he would do, right? What is this kind of Kerouacian, persona, and how do we sort of infuse a little bit of that into everybody?
Mm.
And so I think that's interesting, and I think that that's like the really like the goal of good story and good images is like it has to build around a narrative in some way. And in Alaska, it was all about Harrison, right? It was all about his perspective, and showing this kind of almost naive Australian kid what it's like to be in this super harsh place. And I love that. I've always felt like that putting people in that uncomfortable position is like kind of a critical part of your guys' brand's DNA.
I remember the phone call when you guys were at the hunting lodge and you guys called and you're like, we've got some waves. It's been pretty good, but like, I don't know if it's been like worth the trek. And if we
Yeah.
just hang out a little bit longer, the hunting lodge are about to transition out of the season, I think, but like they said we could stay another week and
Yeah.
there's a storm on the map and we don't know what's going to happen, but we got to stay. And I was like, well, I'm like, God, does everybody cool with that? Does everybody want to stay? And everybody's like, there's like a little bit of wishy-washiness.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, well, let me think about it because there was risk because there wasn't gonna be a plane for another week either. So we had to either get on the plane and leave, or we could hang out and like get a few waves and then actually get on that next flight, right? And it was radical to call back the next morning where it was like the whole crew had gotten together and eaten a bunch of beef jerky and Skittles or whatever you guys were eating up there and came back
Yeah.
100%. We're all in. We're gonna sit around here for five
Mhm.
days. We're gonna wait for the swell and it paid off. And that's like that
Yeah.
that's the
But
drive.
that's the beauty. That's like the beauty of a trip like that is like you are actually leaning into other people. Like everybody's making a group decision together. There's not just one dictator. It's like, hey, this person's got to be here for this, and this person's got to be here for this. And there's actual consequence. There is one flight a week.
Yeah.
Supplies are running low. Like, can we get enough food? Do we even know if the surf is going to be good? Is this going to be a waste of everybody's money? And I think that when there's that level of like risk involved, everybody's having to, the trip or the location is asking a little bit more of you.
Yeah.
That's when the magic occurs, right? Because you know that like until that moment, it just kind of felt like fun, like exciting. And then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, like this is something that is can have consequences in some way. And I think that, in my position, I remember like, yeah, making that call and being like, what do you think? Is this worth it? And it's always a gamble. But when those gambles pay off, you feel really rewarded because you trusted your instincts in some way.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that camaraderie. There's been so many times um, when we've been out there and that situation arises where there's like almost a mutiny and everybody's got to find a way to like pull it back together. I'm not even joking. Sometimes Skittles works.
Dude,
Sometimes beer
fully.
works. There's a lot of different tactics that we've developed over time, but everybody's got to be on board. And if you got one person that's cancerous or someone that's just broken down, I mean, it's just
Yeah.
over.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I always say like if you have somebody that poisons the well, then everybody drinks from the well, and then it
mm,
creates like a bitterness. And that's one thing that's really important is like you were kind of talking about. I take a lot of pride in trying to pick and choose the right people for trips. And I know that you and I have had those conversations too. It's like, what's this person's personality like when something goes wrong? Do they thrive? Do they hit it? Do they approach it with like positivity, or are they like somebody who like really gets emotional? And that can be tough, because it can drag down a whole group. And I think that those perspectives on people and their interpersonal relationships, it's kind of like where you learn a lot. So I appreciate your candor in trying to like, build a group that's going to support each other.
yeah, no, it's all about that campfire, that dinner party, right? Like who's fulfilling each role, who can do what, who can get on the longboard, who can, jump on a quad and just get pitted at the slab and who can tell you
Yeah.
who can tell you a joke when you most need it, or give you a hug or
Yeah.
whatever. light
Yeah,
a
Nate
fire.
Zoller, dude, he's like a one in a million human being. Like I can't think of
Rock.
anybody who's like the more just the most versatile multi-tool in your quiver, Like
Yeah,
it's great to see people like that. Like a younger generation surfer coming up with this kind of old school aesthetic to be like, yeah, like I'll ride anything. I'm not afraid. Like, and I love it.
rad. Well, I want to talk a little bit about authenticity, originality. I feel like people are really consuming photography and media differently, obviously. There's really been a generational shift, I feel like, in the last couple of years. Feels like there's a little bit of a push back to like disposable cameras, iPhones, like throwaway shots. And I think it's
Yeah.
all this kind of like search, in some cases for a younger generation to find that truth. And you and I, we were talking about this
Yeah.
a couple months ago, like your photography was sort of founded on classical technique, driving yourself to get to the right place at the right moment to tell a story, everything that we've talked about today. How do you see the next few years here with this rise of kind of like disposable content versus,
Mm,
photographers that are uh,
mm.
going after it in a different way, and neither is wrong in my
Yeah.
mind. What's your? I do think this younger
Yeah.
generation is trying to find authenticity because
Mhm.
with AI and with everything that's been fed to them over the last 10 years of perfection and the
Yeah.
ease in which someone can post a beautiful photo on Instagram,
Mhm.
they're searching for something else. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. It is a tricky time because I think that, you know, a big part of this is out of circumstance. We have the way in which we share and intake media these days. It's not about shooting for the cover for me, like the cover of the magazine or the cover of the catalog, because those don't exist as much. And so you used to go out and I would be like focusing on that one epic moment, the volcano with the surfer, and that's cool, and it's still like really important for the career. But I think the challenge is like we have an insatiable appetite for content, right? It's like a trash can with no bottom. And I don't mean that like that it's all trash, but I just mean that like even me, we're having to create so many more assets from a trip because, guess what? Back in the day, it used to be like, just needed to produce 100 images that could be picked through for this catalog and blah blah. Now it's like, oh, we need stuff for social and we need stuff for reels, and then we need something like an iPhone dump, and then we need lo-fi, and then we need hi-fi, and it's challenging, it is challenging. And I know that there's a bit of a separation or a generational gap there because it's forced me to kind of relearn and rethink the way in which people consume content. And then I think that, for the younger, generation, yeah, and I just mean like people coming up right now. It doesn't
Yeah,
really matter their age at all.
yeah,
But it's tough because if all you're doing is creating moments that are these behind the scenes BTS, super raw, handy cam, point and shoot, where's the iconic images? Where's the stuff that you're actually creating to sit on your wall behind you here? Like where's the stuff that you're really being thoughtful about, intentional about? Like when I would go on those trips, I would think about oftentimes I really want to get this shot at that beach with the mountains and the surfer here. And if you don't go into a project or a shoot with like a little bit of intentionality, then everything is just reactionary, which
mm,
is cool. It's super raw, but it doesn't always lean towards intentional, thoughtful, quality content, right? I think that's kind of the issue is that when everything's like on that kind of lo-fi level, then where does that leave the more thoughtful, bigger images, the ones that could actually, change, like elevate your career in some way, the ones that are going to be seen and, and get you hired for that next job, that next thing. So I would say it's like a bit of both, Honestly, one of my favorite things is the fact that photography is getting more towards this like flexible, the ability to go out and just shoot with your iPhone, and that's going to be the best content because it should be about that. It should be about storytelling, and if the story is the most relatable from the perspective of the viewer or the consumer, let's be real here. Like if it's the most relatable, if most of what you're shooting is on the phone, then that's great. That just means that there's a connection there. A lot of people, they can't really relate to like a 4-second exposure Northern Lights photo that looks absolutely crazy. Like that's cool. That's a wall hanger. That's a great career image. But so I'm kind of advocating for both.
yeah,
I know that oftentimes either one suffers. So I just really try to understand these days, like what's the objective? What's the goal? And the thing that I ask every brand, and I'm not giving away any trade secrets here, but this is important, and you can speak to this because I think that you're actually really good at it. And I've used you as an example in other podcasts and other things that I've and when I've mentored other photographers. But like when you go and you have that creative call and you're going on that trip, you're doing that job, you're doing that assignment, whatever it is, you're doing that, activation or who knows. I always put it back into the hands of the brand to be like, hey, when we walk away from this experience, we walk away from ice and we walk away from Cuba, wherever, what does success look like? Like, what is the goal at the end of the day? Not not like, am I going to deliver the brief being that we need X amount of video and photos and this and that, but like, what is the goal? Do you want to sell more clothes? Is this about awareness? Are you trying to just have a community activation by doing this film event at one of your stores? Is it not about, revenue? Is this more about, again, PR or whatever? So ultimately, what I'm saying is like the photos in that book you just held up, none of those would have happened if the focus was just raw, you know, handy cam, blah, 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 that wouldn't have been created. But then again, like the day to day, keeping the brand afloat, exciting, relatable, like that's crucial. So I guess what I always say is I try to put it back into the creative director because I'm being hired by that person. And if they ask me, I'll give them my interpretation or my opinion. But I think that's an important thing to know because ultimately I can't draw a roadmap. You can't draw a roadmap to a destination that doesn't exist. Like if we don't know where we're going, then we're going to go like this. And what happens is that that person who's in the, I'm not pointing any fingers, but the person who's in the decision making area, they can just be like, oh, well, they didn't capture the brief. It's like they can, do this and
Mm.
there needs to be risk taken.
Yeah.
You need to have somebody to be like, yo, our goal is to create the most hardcore cool feeling surf trip. Like I want you guys camping. I want it to be raw. I don't care if photos are out of focus. Like I want it to feel gritty and real because it's going to look like this. And with the vision, you can really, as a photographer or a filmer, you can like lean into it, which is sick. That's the best thing. So I know that's a roundabout way of answering your question, but I think it's like it's informed by what the brands are filtering down. And I think that you have a lot of folks in brands that are like not senior creatives, or don't have like that corporate experience or any other background. They're like they were a pro surfer, came up, and now they just happen to hold that role, which is crazy to me. So I think that like it has to come from the brand and then it has to be collaborative. And if we can kind of both figure out what we're trying to do, then it can create magic.
Yeah, I mean, I like the word flexibility. I mean, I think, we're always going to be rolling through cycles, whether we're photographers,
Yeah.
we're fashion designers, we make cars. Like someone recently was like, hey, there's a difference between um, an old Land Cruiser, like an 85 Land Cruiser, and a 2024 Rivian. Now, there's nothing
Mhm.
wrong with either of them. They both kind of can do
Yeah.
similar things. One's kind of old school vintage, and the other's, an electric truck, right?
Yeah.
And there's a pretty good reason why they're not making the exact same Land Cruiser still. They haven't updated one, it's still around, right? But like
Yeah.
change, man. Like we have to be flexible as creatives, we have to be flexible as brands. I think as consumers, we got to be flexible too. Consumers of media and photography and art and whatnot.
Yeah.
Like so like when I think flexibility, I think like and to your point of like defining what the goal is, it's like
Mhm.
there's no reason why we can't go on a trip, capture little morsels, little treats, little Skittles that we drop along the way, and we still go after lasting images that we can reference in 100 years and 50 years and say, hey, that
Mhm.
was an amazing moment that was captured this way. And you know
Yeah.
what? And to defend the disposable camera or the iPhone, I think there's probably going to be some really, really raw, candid
Yeah.
moments that happen there,
Yeah.
and
Totally.
so much of it's circumstance and the style. And we've done running races, from Santa Monica to Las Vegas, and Snack shot one of those, and that puts you in a position where
Yeah.
you're just like you're running and gunning, you're not setting anything up. Like,
Totally.
you're just pointing
Totally.
that thing and you're hoping it's the middle of the night, it's 5 in the morning, someone's on their 120th mile and they're barfing. It's like that's really conducive, and you can get iconic shots that way, whether it's on an iPhone or on a Sony. So I don't know. I think flexibility.
Totally. And you know what? If all you do is you have this like, I want to create wall hanger mentality, like big game hunting only, you're like, I'm just looking for the pride lion,
Yeah.
like you're gonna miss out on a lot of moments. And like you said, there are shoots like the speed project,
Mhm.
Santa Monica to Vegas, where like, yeah, it is all reactionary. So you got to be, and you can do your research. You can look at the this and that. You can understand the route you're taking and what are the iconic moments. But the best stuff does just kind of happen out of nowhere. So it is that mix. It is that flexibility, and it's taken time to kind of understand it. I would almost say that the cover of that book, it was one of those kind of raw moments. I would say that normally my fear though is that nowadays I probably just would have been like, oh, cool, boom, or like grab my film camera. And I'm like, I'm so glad I shot that on a legitimate camera because I've sold prints of that a million times, and
Yeah, yeah.
it's a big thing for me. So yeah, there is that give and take for sure.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see, how your career evolves, and even for us as a brand, and we've kind of like
Mhm.
shaken ourselves and gone, hey, look, we can't just publish that iconic shot, right? Or a set of
Mhm.
those shots, even though we feel
Yeah,
like we've gone the distance,
like
we've
that
done the,
represents you. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and we feel like, holy, like shit, this is authentic. We had 5 people, you know, in the Arctic in Norway, right, for 2 weeks,
Mhm. Yeah.
chasing waves, camping in snow, like
Mhm.
just doing all of the things that it takes to
Right.
get to that moment, and how could
Mhm.
that not be authentic?
Mhm. Yeah.
Especially when you have great people shooting and you got a great cast, but times are changing, so I think that we're amidst this kind of like exploration of how do we combine those two things and
Yeah, and
stay
what's
relevant.
tough is that there would be maybe a different brand who might try to create the same feeling, but like, people are going back and staying in hotels every night or whatever it is. And I do think that there's something so awesome about the authenticism. In fact, I talk with all of my friends who shoot photos these days about that same thing. We get these briefs for like these bigger commercial assignments, and they want us to be shooting tethered with a DIT station so that the creatives can look at it. And you're like, all of the photos that you sent us that were examples of what you wanted, these were all shot like raw. You're with your friends having a backpacking trip, or you're, camping and surfing on the Big Sur coast, and nobody was hired to be a model. Nobody was here to like think that they're, going to be shot for a campaign. They are real moments. So how do you, that's what I love about kind of what you guys have done, and that what you still put energy into is like you've always said, you're like, I want it to be raw. I want it to feel that way. I want someone to break a little bit because that emotion that comes from it is crucial, right?
First principles, man. I think we always got to go back to those, whether you're a brand, you're a photographer, you're a person, or anything. It's like, what are the core values? And I feel like for you, for Roark, for any of us, if we can go back to those things, and if rawness is part
Mhm.
of it, you can achieve that rawness and authenticity in different ways, ideally, as times change. It doesn't mean
Yep.
you do it in one single way. As long as you come
Yeah.
back to that, I think you get into trouble when you change your first principles and you change your core ethos to kind of like move with the trends. Um, I never like to see that. So we try
Yeah.
not.
Yeah. And you just can't react. You can't react to every trend because then as a brand, you're doing this, and that's crazy. Same thing as a creative. Like I have realized a long time ago, like I can't do everything well. And I think that the desire to do that is more of like a, you know, self-worth thing than it is anything else. You kind of got to like learn where you're the very best at what you do, where you can offer 100% of
Yeah.
your work. And then maybe there's other aspects where you can't.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I like it. I like it. Is exploration dead? Have we gone everywhere? What's next? You kind of touched on it earlier. Do we just, I know there's more places for us to go, but is it about doing those trips in different ways through a different lens? Instead of surfing your way across Iceland, are you going to bike pack across
Mm.
Iceland? Like, what's your take on that? Because at some point,
Mm.
100 years from now, we will probably have gone most places on Earth at least.
Mm. Right.
So, how are you looking at that moving forward when you're
I think
identifying?
that's a great question. And honestly, if I was like, yo, the only way for me to create great imagery is for me to go to places nobody's ever been, that's ridiculous. Like that's unsustainable as a practice. So I would say going deeper and further in the places that you know or are accessible, that's the first thing. Because there are so many empty bays, empty point breaks that are just a little bit further, a little bit more effort to get there. And or just great images, stories to be told that require a little more effort. So I don't think exploration is dead. In fact, I'm a big advocate that the best exploration we ever do is going to be the internal one. Like it's going to be the one inside ourselves to figure out what we care about, what we value, and how we've changed and how those things have changed. And so I'm a big advocate for, yeah, like looking at opportunities to tell a story in just a different way. Maybe the story is about a person, maybe it's about a place, maybe it's about an environmental initiative.
Mm.
And there's always, some different angle you can approach it from. I usually feel like, to me, the best storytelling, especially when filmmaking, it's like it's all about the entry point. How do we get people into this story? How do we get them to care about the character? How do we get them to care about the trip or the experience? How are we going to make them sit down and be entertained for 30 minutes when it's not just like, surf action? Because I don't think that that interests me, nor does it interest you. There's always so much more. So I think it's about the entry point. Sometimes that looks like, maybe it's not maybe it's not the key person. Maybe it's their mom. Maybe it's their dog. Maybe it's, this experience they had. So I think that, in terms of exploration, the same stories can be told in just a different way. In fact, you and I could go to Glacier Point in Yosemite and take the exact same photograph with the exact same camera, nothing different. But the only difference might be what I say about it, how
Mm.
I articulate my experience as the author of this moment, because I felt it, because I was there and I drove through the night to get there and I busted out this lens and my hands were cold and all these things, all these emotions, all the who, what, where, when, why, um, that created this almost, you know, um, emotional experience for me or whatever intimate experience with nature. Like, it's about articulating that in a way that people receive it maybe differently, because I think in the early days you look at some of the efforts filmmakers would go through and it was pretty minimal, when it comes to like making a surf film or making an adventure film. It's like, yeah, we went and here we are and I'm just filming everything, as opposed to like, I love to break it down and be like, well, what was the struggle this person went through? And so I think, that, yeah, to answer your question, I don't think exploration's dead. I think that, we're gonna see places through new perspectives always, and it
Mm.
just requires looking at it from a fresh perspective. And I would say that that fresh perspective is the hardest thing to find, especially when you've gone back to places you love and you've developed a relationship with it. I look at it, um, from the idea that, like, if I get to see it from my kids' eyes, or I get to see it from the eyes of somebody who's never been there, what are
Mm.
they feeling? What are they seeing? It's so refreshing to take somebody somewhere they've never been, right?
Yeah.
And, yeah, of course, like remote places will always be there, but that's just going to require more time, effort, money,
Yeah.
all those things.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's interesting that you say it. I think, as you grow from a 17-year-old, that looks at a destination or a culture or people with certain lens, it's just going to evolve every 5 to 10 years. That perspective is really going to change, and I think as an artist, you bring something different to the table with that perspective change. And I always go back and you asked this question specifically when we went to the Aleutian Islands. Why does anybody care?
Mm.
Why does someone want to watch
Yeah,
it? Nobody wants to watch this just to watch the surfing. People have been there
right.
before. We might get better waves. We may get a new wave, but
Mhm.
why do we care? And I think, definitely as that creative, I feel like we're going full circle here, right? It's like, why are we going to this place? And if we can
Mhm.
create some sort of connection, some reason why, some story that inspires one single person to try and go there, try to just get out of their backyard and
Mhm.
discover, I think we've won. So.
Right. Or see the world in a new way, open their world up to be bigger than they thought. Like, that's what travel was for me. And I feel like I'm the byproduct of travel as an education more than anything else. And so I feel indebted to it. I feel indebted to what the world has given me as a North Star, right? And so, just to your point, if I can get one person to go and see that place, have that transformative experience, not be a tourist but a traveler, and I feel
Mm.
like I've done my job, and I feel validated in some way.
Totally.
But yeah, I agree. Like, I love that those are the questions that we're asking. Like, why are we going there? What's the point? Is it just to get sick waves? Because you could do that, a lot of other places for cheaper.
Yeah. Well, I don't think exploration's dead. I remember very early on in Roark, someone, I'm not going to name the name, looked at me and they're like, you know what? I don't think this brand's ever going to work. You're going to run out of places to go. You're going to run out of ideas and it's going to be boring. And I'm like, dude. And I've like took that as like a chip to this day. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I hear you.
Well, you've done a pretty good job at it. I mean, also
Work in
too, I think
progress.
the mystery around it is important. Like, there always has to be some mystery in a trip, in an experience, which I think is kind of key to hold our attention. And I look for that. How can I make something feel mysterious when maybe it hasn't been? How can you make some? And I think that's a good practice too as a creative. It's like, how
Mm.
can you go somewhere, make it feel fresh looking, mysterious, new, almost like give, more hints than and answers. That's the kind of work that I think that we want to create.
Mm. Well said. Well said. So we only have a couple minutes left. I get this question all the time, and I sort of alluded to that earlier, but what was your best trip? What was the what trip that provided the most growth, the biggest smile, the best friend? Like, I think everybody equates, you know, best to the most fun or the most moving, and it can mean so many different things. So for you, what was the best trip ever?
Best trip ever. So I would say that best trip ever, probably the first trip I did to the Aleutian Islands in Alaska, only because when you're going somewhere where there's such little information, you're looking online, you're scouring the internet, you're calling pubs and Dutch Harbor to get information. And I mean, like you're really going to an extent to
Yeah.
kind of find out. And all you're seeing is like foggy photos and no images of the coast, and you have no idea. You're just looking at Google Maps to go there and to find that reward of like seeing it
Mm.
epic, perfect,
Yeah.
is like I don't know. It just feels like a gift. It's like, oh, like you came this far, you worked this hard, here you go. And that place for me was the most like eye-opening. But I would say there's been so many trips that taught me other things. Cuba, for example, like one of my favorites. In fact, I've shared this story with people quite a bit, but I remember being in Cuba. I hadn't really shot a lot of street photography, but Cuba's kind of that place where street photography is just, it's everywhere. There's moments everywhere. People are just going through life and, old cars and this and that. And I remember walking on the Great Ocean Road. There's these kids jumping off the cement, wall
Yeah.
into these like notches in the reef, like sketchy, like lava rock. They're jumping in. I walk over there and I'm all excited, like, oh, I'm a photojournalist, pull out my camera, and then they stop and they like pause, and they're like they ask for money, which is totally fine and it's expected.
Mm.
But I was like, man, that's not the moment that I want. I don't want this to feel transactional, even though it's okay to pay them, but it
Yeah. Yeah.
but it was more about like the feeling that I wanted to walk away with was different. And so I remember going back to my hotel, thinking about it, and I like covered all the logos on my cameras. I blacked them out. I grabbed like a shoestring, put it around my neck. I carried like a point and shoot. And the next morning, like sunrise, I'm walking down the Great Ocean Road. I'm way more stripped down. I'm like, I don't need this big body with all these
Yeah.
lenses in
Yeah.
my camera bag because it's threatening.
Yeah.
And I pull up, those kids are there, they're jumping in the water. And I walk up and look at them and they stop and do the same thing and then and ask for money. And I'm like, no, I'm just here to swim. And I just put my stuff down and I just jumped in. And it was
Yeah.
terrifying. I jumped in the reef and I swam around for like 45 minutes. And by the end of that, not only are we friends, I knew all of their names. They were asking me to shoot photographs. It was just like the experience was different. It was about patience. It's about connecting on a human level and composing an image, not just taking, not capturing something. And I feel like that trip taught me so much that I've still applied to every time I go and have like a nonverbal communication with somebody because obviously I can't speak the language. We're trying to connect in some other way. And so that was transformative and informative for me at an age when I really needed it and I really needed to understand. And yeah, like I eventually gave him a little money because it was what I wanted to do. But like I look at those photos and I'm like, those are my friends. And I had such a sick experience with them. And I remember that moment. And it was something that like resonates with me and it's meaningful, more meaningful than just like, oh, this is cool. I'm gonna grab this.
I remember that photo. I remember being there earlier, and it just goes back to connection, right? Like if you can create an authentic connection with the subject, create a friend, I mean, there's a huge difference. And I also remember me jumping off and getting stuck on
Yeah.
the lava rock trying to climb back up with my
Yeah.
sensitive feet, and Rod Stewart calling you out, going, Berkey, Berkey, get a photo of this guy. And I'm just like crabbed on this like 15-foot
Well,
like lava
because
slab,
it's
just
not
like,
it's gnarly. And
and it
like if you
hurts.
slip, you're gonna get cheese grated down. It's gnarly.
That was my
Yeah.
authentic connection
Yeah.
in that moment. But dude, thank you
Yeah.
so much. I appreciate the honesty and the hour together. And again, like I said before, I really appreciate you pushing me to take this brand further and go new places. And you continue to do it. A couple months you
Yeah.
called me with some ideas. So I hope to get back out there with you. And man, best of luck. And Really, really, really appreciate what you do for the world actually, and inspiring people
Yeah.
together.
Dude, appreciate you, bro. Appreciate everything you've done, and you've stayed true blue, which has been really special to see. And I think that those early trips were transformative in a lot of ways, kind of it was the first time outside of shooting for the magazine, outside of shooting for editorial, that a brand was willing to go to some of those places for like a brand, for a commercial project, for a branded project. And it kind of paved the way, to be fair. Like, it didn't take long for other competitors to be like, oh, well, this is so real, so raw. We want a piece of this, And so give yourself the credit because
I'll
it
take it.
took some vision. And yeah, I
Thank you.
appreciate you, Ryan.
All right,
Thanks, man.
brother. Be well.
Cheers.
Yeah.